Mason Alvarez wasn't breathing, not because of injury or fear, but because the air inside the shuttle's docking port smelled like concentrated vinegar and mothballs. It clung to his sinuses with the determination of a tax collector. He'd been warned multiple times about the environmental blend at the Galactic Peacekeeper Academy, but nothing prepared him for the olfactory horror of over a dozen species-compatible atmosphere compromise. A thin creature with a carapace, the color of bruised grapes, scuttled forward and chirped. "Earth Species Unit, Mason Alvarez, you are 112 centi units behind scheduled arrival slot." "I'm 5 minutes late," Mason said, resisting the urge to rub his watering eyes. "Customs at orbit entry flagged my snack bag." "Ah, contraband." "No," Mason said firmly, shifting his duffel. "Just beef jerky and coffee, food." The alien's eye cluster rotated slightly. "Oh, processed bioskins and tree bean sludge, noted." Mason wasn't even through the arrival corridor, and he was already the punchline. 2 hours later, he stood in a lecture amphitheater that smelled less like vinegar and more like warm fish. At least it was a step up. Commander Varax, 12 feet tall and with 2 mouths, welcomed the new cadets to the academy in a multilingual address, switching from guttural cave tones to fluid vibrations. Mason had a translation bud tucked behind his ear, though it garbled things occasionally. When the commander referred to Earth as the combustion planet, he chose not to correct the translation. "All cadets will report to Sector 12 simulation training after midday sustenance. We welcome Earth's representative," Varax said, one of his mouths forming what looked vaguely like a smile. "May he survive." The auditorium erupted in laughter. Mason gave a tight nod. In the corridor afterward, a cadet bumped shoulders with him on purpose. "Did you really bring thermal poison in a metal flask?" the speaker asked, her voice sharp but curious. She was a narrow-limbed Thresian with opalescent skin and slitted pupils that made her look like she was constantly judging his species' evolutionary choices. "It's coffee," Mason replied, "caffeinated. Helps with reaction time." Another cadet, a squat fellow, whose torso widened into his shoulders like an inverted bowling pin, grunted. "Heard it's used to clean oxidized fuel cores on Grelv ships. Must be soothing for humans to drink degreaser." "Only when we're out of whiskey," Mason deadpanned. There was a pause. Then more laughter. He learned quickly that alien cadets didn't hate him, they were just morbidly fascinated, especially with his food. During breaks, Mason unwrapped vacuum-sealed pouches from his ration kit, only to become the unintentional comedy act of the day. The cheese puffs were the worst offender. "You chew colored air pockets?" asked a cadet from the Murney cluster, watching Mason with wide eyes as he popped a few neon orange curls into his mouth. "What's the nutritional value? Explosive? Decorative?" "None. They taste good." "You eat taste?" "Yes." General Snickers followed him like a trail of shame. Trail mix, as it happened, didn't fare much better. When he explained the mix of dried fruit, chocolate, and nuts was for energy during field ops, the aliens theorized it must be ceremonial, or possibly a punishment. Jerky was declared mummified flesh, which, honestly, wasn't the worst descriptor Mason had heard. But the coffee? That was the real controversy. The Academy permitted species to bring personal dietary enhancers, provided they weren't volatile, bio-infectious, or psychologically destabilizing. Mason's coffee squeaked past on a technicality, but the first time he opened his thermos during an afternoon module, the stench caused an actual room evacuation. A Yalari cadet ran diagnostics on the spilled droplets, confused by the high temperature and acidity. "This is a corrosive substance," he declared, scandalized. "Why is it not in containment?" "It's in a thermos," Mason said, gesturing. "Vacuum insulated. It keeps it hot." "Why does it need to be hot?" Mason shrugged. "Because cold coffee is disgusting." After that, coffee became a whispered term. No one took it seriously until the asteroid simulation. 6 days later, Sector 12's simulation dome loomed like a glass onion across the compound. Inside, cadets were briefed on a mock asteroid interception exercise. The goal: prevent a theoretical extinction-level object from striking a populated planet. Each team was assigned roles, trajectory, adjustment, resource allocation, kinetic impact coordination. Stress levels surged. The simulation was rigorous, built with real-time AI environmental calculations and shifting conditions. No do-overs. You succeeded or watch the digital version of a world burn. Mason was assigned to orbital logistics. Not glamorous, but key. 15 minutes into the scenario, half the cadets were sweat-slick or jittering. A Xelth engineer passed out. Mason, his hands shaking slightly from the caffeine taper he'd attempted earlier that week, quietly pulled out his thermos. Twist. Steam hissed into the air. Around him, cadets froze. One shrieked. "Don't wait." He didn't hesitate. Mason lifted the thermos and took a long, soothing sip. The coffee was hot comfortably, familiarly hot, burning across his tongue and down his throat like the embrace of a spicy memory. Absolute silence. Then chaos. Someone triggered a distress signal. A red strobe bathed the room. 2 medics ran in with containment gear. A cadet attempted to tackle Mason mid-sip. Mason barely managed to swallow before being shoved backward by a concerned reptilian with a pulse scanner. Vital signs failing? Does your circulatory system require pressure stabilization? Blink if neural damage is occurring. What? You just drank thermal-grade corrosive fluid. It's coffee. That was boiling. Yeah, well, I like it hot. The word spread within minutes. By the time Mason was escorted to the medbay, more for observation than injury, the news had mutated. Depending on who was asked, he had either drunk engine coolant or molten metal extract. Rumors spun out like planetary rings. One cadet whispered, his species must regulate temperature through internal lava channels. Another speculated Earthlings were immune to pain. Mason sat on a medical recliner while scanners orbited him in humming loops. A Neuralian technician tapped data into a tablet. Liquid sample taken from your thermos measured 179 Earth Fahrenheit. That is a Category 4 dermal breach hazard. I told you, Mason said, sipping cold water now. It's just coffee. There are minor burns on your tongue and esophagus lining. I know, that's normal. The technician stared. Normal? For Earth people. You get used to it. The look on his face was the exact expression someone would wear if you told them humans regularly sunbathed on radioactive beaches for fun. Mason closed his eyes. And the Academy would never see him the same way again. 3 hours after the coffee incident, Mason Alvarez found himself sitting cross-legged on a biogel examination table, barefoot and wrapped in what could generously be called a modesty shroud. It clung to his body like damp laundry and smelled faintly of moss. Across from him, a nervous 4-armed medical officer tapped at a screen while a transparent containment pod hissed shut around the offending thermos. Is that necessary? Mason asked. The medic didn't look up. Regulations require all biologically reactive substances be isolated until a cross-species toxicity profile is complete. That includes organics classified as Class 2 dermal agents. It's breakfast, Mason muttered. The medic paused his typing and turned 2 of his eyes directly at Mason. Your breakfast has a higher pH than alkaline battery fluid. That does not suggest food. Mason sighed and leaned back against the gel wall, which pulsed faintly in response. I'm not arguing that your bodies can't handle it, but mine can. Humans evolved in some pretty unfriendly places. Statistical resilience is not justification for ingestion. The medic resumed typing. Your esophageal lining shows signs of second-degree thermal irritation. While minor, it is technically classified as an injury. Mason didn't argue. He knew better. Truthfully, he did feel a little tender in the throat, and the tip of his tongue throbbed. That last sip had been a little hotter than ideal. Do you experience pleasure from this discomfort? The medic asked without looking up. What? No. A pause. Interesting. And what? I'm not a masochist. I just like the ritual. Coffee helps me think. It's grounding. Another pause. Grounding as in emotionally stabilizing? Or literally connected to your terrestrial origin? Both, maybe. The medic gave a series of clicks Mason hoped was thoughtful and not judgmental. Then, a side door swished open, and a tall, peach-skinned administrator entered, her robes marked with the blue insignia of the Interspecies Safety Review Board. Mr. Alvarez, she began crisply, you are currently the subject of an active investigation regarding the unintentional triggering of an environmental hazard alarm during critical training protocols. I didn't know drinking coffee would cause that, Mason replied, sitting up. It's not like I waved a flamethrower around. That's precisely the issue, she said. To us, you may as well have. You consumed a Category 4 reactive compound in a shared environment, in a high-stress scenario, without prior declaration or containment protocol. It was in a thermos, Mason said. That is containment. Not by our standards. The room was silent for a beat. Then she sighed, and her tone softened. You're not in trouble, Mr. Alvarez, but we do need to understand what other potential to surprises your species might be walking around with. An hour later, Mason was seated at a long table in a conference room flanked by 3 interpreters, 2 data analysts, and 1 increasingly fascinated Zelth cadet who kept staring at his hands like they held secrets. So, began the analyst, flipping through a glowing screen. Let's begin with the basics. You stated earlier that humans routinely consume liquids above 150 degrees Fahrenheit. Yeah, that's common, especially in winter. Winter, that's the season of cold? Yes. You counter external cold by introducing internal heat damage? Well, when you put it like that. The interpreter blinked slowly. Do you also consume solid foods at elevated temperatures? Sure. Pizza, soup, baked goods, a lot of stuff is cooked hot and eaten before it cools. Do you possess heat-resistant tissue? No, we just build tolerance over time. It's cultural, too. Some people can't take it, others drink boiling tea like it's tap water. The alien scribes took notes so fast their data quills sparked. The questions came for hours. Did humans deliberately injure themselves for energy intake? No. Cooking made food safer and tastier. Why did they burn their mouths for ritual comfort? Because warmth is soothing. Were all humans capable of ingesting volatile substances? Only if volatility included chili peppers and carbonated soda. The mention of spicy food caused a stir. One of the analysts whispered something, and another brought out a species toxicity chart. Mason watched, both amused and exhausted, as the conversation devolved into a heated discussion about Earth's tolerance for acids, alkaloids, and naturally occurring irritants. When the question of capsaicin came up, he smiled weakly. Yeah, we eat that, on purpose. A lot of people love it. It causes pain, the Zelth cadet whispered, stunned. You ingest pain. It's part of the flavor. You season pain. I wouldn't phrase it like that, but yes. By the end of the day, Mason returned to his quarters to find a security label had been affixed to his snack cabinet. A small yellow triangle flashed over it. Bioculturally hazardous. Handle with oversight. He flopped into his bunk and exhaled, staring up at the ceiling. His throat was still tender, but he didn't regret it. The next morning, he was late to first drill. Not by much, maybe 5 minutes. But when he entered the mess hall to grab a breakfast bar and a tea substitute, the room fell quiet. A dozen alien cadets glanced up from their trays, eye stalks and sensory limbs subtly twitching. One of them, the same Thracian who had mocked his snacks a week earlier, gestured toward the bench beside her. He sat. Without a word, she pushed a small metallic cup toward him. Inside was a pale green liquid that steamed faintly. It's made from boiled wiffle root, she said, mildly bitter. Only 102 degrees. Try not to die. Mason took a sip. Not bad. She stared. It tastes like compost and electrical burn. I've had worse airplane coffee. Another cadet leaned forward, curious. Your thermos. Is it insulated with radiation shielding? No, just steel and vacuum seal. Keeps heat in. The Zelth cadet approached, holding a tiny dropper. May I sample the coffee? For research purposes? Mason hesitated. Sure, but literally 1 drop. I'm not kidding. The Zelth nodded solemnly, dabbed a tiny drop onto his tongue, and immediately passed out. The next time Mason entered the simulation dome, he found that his thermos had been tagged with a blinking beacon. A warning label read, Class B, thermal substance, do not ingest without human supervision. And, underneath that, in small flickering script, hazard class caffeine, contents may induce fear, awe, or collapse. Mason Alvarez had seen a lot of absurd things in the short time since arriving at the Galactic Peacekeeper Academy, like a sentient mushroom that solved orbital math by vibrating, or a grooming station that doubled as a decontamination shower, but nothing topped what he was currently staring at. A full diplomatic liaison team from the Inner World Council had arrived on campus, For coffee. Not even Earth coffee, Mason muttered under his breath, watching through the transparent barrier as a high-ranking Avili diplomat, in robes that shimmered like molten bronze, gestured toward his now infamous thermos. My coffee. Beside him, Commander Varak stood still, two mouths pursed. It has come to the Council's attention, he said dryly, that your dietary habits may constitute a cross-species safety concern. Or, alternatively, a unique adaptation of interest to survival specialist branches. You mean, you're trying to figure out if I'm a walking biohazard or a biological wonder? I remain open to both interpretations. It turned out, after the blackout incident with the Zelth cadet, word had spread fast, not just within the Academy, but to planetary governments and allied species observing human integration. The idea that a sapient species willingly consumed what others considered a chemical hazard triggered both alarm and curiosity. Earth's ambassador was already scheduled for a review summit in 2 weeks. Now, the agenda had been revised to include a topic titled Human Thermal and Chemical Tolerances, Potential Military or Cultural Implications. Mason rubbed his face and sighed. I just wanted caffeine. Your just now includes 3 diplomatic delegations, a pending cultural impact study, and at least one species considering re-evaluation of your entire planetary classification. Reclassification? As what? Varax's inner mouth twitched. Potential extremophile civilization. That afternoon, Mason was escorted to a new room, larger, more sterile, and filled with monitoring equipment. Not a medical bay this time. This was a controlled demonstration chamber. 3 alien scientists stood behind a partition, flanked by safety drones and filtration vents. A new thermos, identical in make but labeled test unit, sat on a pedestal. A robotic arm carefully poured a measured amount into a thermal-proof vial. Please confirm the liquid is identical to your prior sample, the lead researcher said through a speaker. Mason stepped forward, sniffed, and nodded. Yep, dark roast, Central American blend. The Thracian cadet from earlier, her name was Sira, stood nearby, acting as an observer. She wore a skeptical expression, though it was slightly softer than before. She leaned in slightly. So, why coffee? With all the drinks your species has, why pick the one that doubles as an anti-corrosive? Mason shrugged. Habit. Focus. It's also tied to comfort for a lot of us. You know how some species hum to self, soothe, or cling to heat stones? Same thing. Plus, I grew up in a cold place. We drank coffee outside in sub-zero temperatures. It kept your hands warm. Why not wear gloves? I said I was from a cold place. I didn't say we were smart. She snorted, and for once, the expression wasn't derisive. The researcher resumed. Begin thermal tolerance demonstration. Level 1. A small cup, identical to a human espresso demitasse, was filled and placed before him. Mason sipped. Internal temperature, measured at 137 Fahrenheit, the analyst noted aloud. Subject displays no visible signs of distress. Level 2. Another cup, hotter this time. Mason sipped again. It stung. His tongue still hadn't fully healed from the asteroid Sim incident, and the irritation flared. He winced slightly. The researchers murmured behind the glass. Pain response observed, said the analyst. Mason set the cup down. Still fine. That's not unusual. We know it burns. We drink it anyway. Level 3. Third cup. 179 degrees. Not quite boiling, but close. He hesitated, then took a small sip. The burn sliced down his throat like a red-hot coin. He coughed once, breathing through his nose. It hurt. Not excruciating, but definitely above comfort. He pushed the cup away. That's my limit today, he said hoarsely. Noted, the analyst replied. Surface tissue scan indicates micro-trauma, advisable to cease further ingestion. The scientists conferred. One of them, a million with scaled skin and a heavy sandpaper-like voice, spoke up through the comms. You accept pain to a measurable degree. For what benefit? Clarity, alertness, comfort. Honestly, sometimes just momentum. When your body's tired and your brain is foggy, a hot drink that smells like home is enough to get you through the day. You choose this willingly. Yeah. The scientist turned to confer with the others, clearly baffled. Sira tilted her head. Does it work? Mason looked at her. Depends. You tell me. She looked down at the readouts on her monitor. Your stress markers dropped by 9% after ingestion. He smiled. There you go. 2 days later, Earth received an official request from the Academy. Submit a cultural hazard awareness dossier outlining all substances regularly consumed by humans that may cause unintended physiological responses in other species. The list was long. Coffee, spicy food, carbonated beverages, alcohol, menthol, ginger, vinegar, cinnamon, peppermint oil. Hot sauce triggered its own subsection. Mason found the whole thing equal parts hilarious and exhausting. He now had a minder assigned during mealtimes, not as a guard, but to scan what he ate before anyone else could accidentally try it. Someone had licked a cheese puff the previous evening and experienced what they described as powder-based neural distress. And then there were the requests. Cadets began approaching Mason during break periods, awkwardly, casually, asking about small, supervised samples. The first volunteer, a three-hearted aquatic called Delac, tried jerky. He chewed with exaggerated caution, then paused. It is chewy. Yeah, that's the point. Is this from a living animal? Not anymore. Delac blinked. I will take 2 more. By the end of the week, a new cabinet was installed in the dining sector. It was climate-sealed and marked with Earth's flag and the warning. Human snacks. Handle with instruction. High probability of discomfort. Inside were sealed pouches of various treats, jerky, nuts, energy bars, and coffee beans unbrewed, thankfully with labels denoting caution levels. Sierra walked with Mason past it one evening. You know, she said, some cadets think you're doing this on purpose, that it's a cultural dominance display, a power play. Mason shook his head. I just want my morning routine. Funny. Your morning routine gave 4 species an existential crisis. They stopped walking. She looked at him seriously. You don't get how strange this is. Most of us grow up learning which substances can kill us by accident. For you, it's more of a guessing game. Mason considered that. Maybe, but that's why we test things, push edges. Humans don't always know what's safe, so we try, and adapt. She stared at him a moment longer, then offered a small, thin smile. Your species is like a toddler with fire. Terrifying, but occasionally brilliant. I'll take that as a compliment. That night, Mason sat in the cadet lounge with his feet up, sipping from a very clearly labeled thermos. The label now included a full temperature readout in 3 unit systems, a biohazard symbol, and a polite disclaimer, not for shared use. Across the room, 3 alien cadets sipped from tiny cups of warm herbal mist. Another poked cautiously at a cheese puff, taking micro nibbles and bracing after each one like it might explode. And all of them kept stealing glances at Mason. Not with suspicion, not quite with fear, but definitely with a new kind of curiosity. Respect tinged with something else. Caution. The first time someone knocked on Mason Alvarez's door before morning call, he assumed it was a mistake. He was wrong. Standing in the corridor, looking about as uncomfortable as a being with translucent cartilage skin could manage, was Rilna Cadet from the Sevet cluster. No facial expressions, just shifting colors across his skin to convey emotion. Today's palette was an awkward blend of beige and hesitant green. Mason blinked at him, still rubbing sleep from his eyes. Can I help you? Riln extended a small metal canister, clutched delicately in 2 upper arms. I brewed this. For comparison, it is made from fermented gran fungus, our version of a stimulant. Mild, slightly bitter, approximately 93 Earth Fahrenheit. Mason took the canister, confused. I thought, Riln said slowly, we might exchange drinks. Culturally, you know, bonding. It wasn't the first time someone had shown curiosity, but it was the first time a cadet had offered something in return. Mason smiled, stepped back, and gestured him in. That morning, a strange, quiet ritual began an impromptu beverage diplomacy session, Earth style. No diplomatic pins or flags, just 2 cadets sitting on opposite sides of a desk, each sipping the other's hot drink and trying not to offend anyone's ancestors. The gran fungus brew was earthy and not entirely unpleasant. Mason winced only once, earning a satisfied shade of seafoam green from Riln. Riln took the tiniest sip of Mason's carefully cooled coffee and blinked rapidly. It tastes dark, heavy. Like regret. Thank you, Mason said. That's exactly what I was going for. Word got around. By the end of the week, the hot liquid exchange was an unofficial tradition. Cadets from half a dozen species would bring their local brews roots, steeped in mineral water, steamed bark infusions, vapor extractions from flower oils, and meet in the lounge just after first drill. Mason never brewed his coffee above 150 degrees Fahrenheit now. Not because he couldn't handle it, but because he'd realized most others couldn't even be in the room otherwise. There were still restrictions. His thermos remained labeled. The medbay still ran tests on anything new, but the mood had shifted. The alien cadets no longer saw Mason as a walking accident. Now, he was the guy you went to when you wanted to understand the weird edges of human behavior. Syrah, the Thresian cadet, had even started bringing him local flavor samples from her own sector, bitter snacks that tasted like dried battery acid, but paired surprisingly well with coffee. They sat together more often now. Their banter had shifted from mockery to challenge. "How do you even have taste receptors left?" she asked one afternoon, watching him crunch on a wasabi almond. "They grew back," Mason said. "Just like my dignity." "You're assuming you had some to begin with." "Takes one to know one," sparkle eyes. A week later, she gifted him a specialized mug built with temperature modulation and automatic cool-down thresholds. "For safety," she said dryly. "And so you don't melt your face off before finals." It quickly became Mason's most prized possession. The Cultural Hazard Awareness dossier had been finalized and published in 12 languages. Earth's entry had 3 appendices and a color-coded index. Rumor had it the Avili requested a condensed version just to reduce diplomatic strain. The most updated version included entries for coffee, hot and cold variants, cheese-based puffed snacks, warning, addictive texture, jerky C, dried organic proteins, spicy condiments, multiple hazard tiers, chewing gum classified under non-nutritive oral fixations, pop rocks banned after 2 species experienced tongue panic. The section titled Carbonated Beverages had its own footnote. Fizz does not equal poison. Repeat, fizz does not equal poison. Mason didn't write the dossier, but they did ask him for quotes. His favorite was printed on the back cover. "Just because it makes your mouth hurt doesn't mean it's not food." One evening, as the sky above the academy turned a soft red lavender and the dome retracted to reveal a cluster of local moons, Mason sat on the east balcony with Syrah and 2 others, Riln and Delac, the aquatic cadet who'd once believed jerky was a sacred relic. They were passing around tiny cups again, not coffee this time, but something from Syrah's world, a thick, spiced broth with citrus notes and a heat that lingered on the tongue. Mason sipped carefully, then nodded. "That's really good. It's meant to be shared during times of strategic uncertainty," Syrah said, pre-battle usually, "to build cohesion." Delac nodded solemnly. "Or to confess romantic intentions, sometimes both, can be awkward." Everyone laughed, even Riln, who turned a deep greenish gold. Mason looked around at the group so different from when he'd arrived, when every snack he pulled out was met with wide eyes and suppressed gag reflexes. Now, they shared meals, drinks, jokes, the occasional dare. Even the Zelth cadet who blacked out was back on his feet. He waved awkwardly from across the dome whenever he saw Mason, like a guy who still wasn't sure if they were friends or had just lived through a mutual trauma. Mason didn't mind either way. The academy had changed him. Just like he'd changed it, though, not in the way he'd expected. Not with tech, not with tactics. With a thermos, with stubbornness, with the quiet human need to keep something familiar in unfamiliar places. Comfort, heat, and a little bit of flavor. Weeks passed. Final drills came and went. Mason passed his 0G navigation exam with above-average marks and only dislocated one shoulder during the debris crawl test. It took him 5 weeks of recovery and rehab to get full motion back. He learned quickly that mild impact trauma meant very different things to species with exoskeletons. He was cleared just in time for graduation assignments. His posting was temporary, an interspecies training ship on the Outer Arc, designed to prep cadets for long-range peacekeeping missions. Diverse crew, harsh environments, cultural complexity, perfect for someone who knew how to bridge gaps. The morning of departure, Syrah found him in the mess hall. She handed him a pouch. I modified the spice ratios, she said. Less battery, more citrus. Mason took it, smiling. Thanks. You want me to send you new snacks from wherever I end up? If they're labeled correctly. Where's the fun in that? She tilted her head. We're going to miss you, Thermos. Mason slung his bag over one shoulder and paused at the door. Take care of the coffee cabinet. She nodded. With gloves. He turned back, saluted jokingly with his travel mug, and headed toward the shuttle bays. As the ramp closed and the ship lifted, Mason took his seat and poured himself a cup from the travel thermos. He didn't sip immediately, just held it, let the heat seep into his hands. He looked out the viewport as the academy shrank into a glimmering spire in the distance. Somewhere down there, aliens were learning to fear cheese dust. And for the first time, he really felt like part of something bigger.